Imagine spending 2 years saving up for the biggest football tournament on the planet. You book your flights, you book your hotel, you secure your ticket after waiting in a virtual queue with millions of other fans. You tell your family this is the trip of a lifetime, and then, weeks before the opening whistle, your visa gets denied. No explanation, no appeal, just a letter telling you that you will not be attending the 2026 FIFA World Cup. That happened to dozens of fans, maybe hundreds, and it was only the beginning of a story that nobody in football really wanted to talk about. But before that, subscribe the channel for more future updates. The 2026 World Cup was built on a promise. FIFA called it the biggest, most ambitious, most commercially successful football tournament in history. A 48-team format, 16 host cities across 3 countries, a projected economic windfall of over $30 billion for the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And now, right here in the middle of the group stage, with the round of 32 just days away, a different conversation has been unfolding. One about empty hotel rooms, about fans who never made it, about a tourism boom that, depending on which city you're standing in, either arrived fashionably late or never showed up at all. So what is actually happening on the ground at the 2026 FIFA World Cup, and does the reality match the promise? If you're new here, hit subscribe and stay with us because this story has more layers than almost anything we've covered this year. Let's start with the hotels, because that's where the first alarm bells started ringing, and it's worth understanding exactly how things got to this point. Months before the tournament kicked off, FIFA had done something that seemed sensible on paper. They reserved enormous blocks of hotel rooms across all 16 host cities. The rooms were meant to accommodate teams, officials, sponsors, and the vast FIFA operation that travels with a World Cup. Hotels were told to hold those rooms, price them accordingly, and plan their entire summer revenue model around the booking. Then, earlier this year, FIFA exercised what's called an opt-out clause. In cities like Boston, Dallas, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Seattle, up to 70% of the rooms FIFA had reserved were suddenly released back to the market. The American Hotel and Lodging Association, the largest hotel industry body in the country, representing over 32,000 properties, said publicly that this created a vacuum. Hotels had built their entire forward-looking revenue model around those blocks. Staff had been hired, pricing structures had been set, and then, almost overnight, the demand signal that had driven all of those decisions was gone. FIFA pushed back. A spokesperson said that all room releases were conducted in line with contractually agreed timelines, and that this is standard practice for an event of this scale. But hotel operators didn't see it that way. 80% of hotels surveyed across the 11 U.S. host cities said their bookings were tracking below initial forecasts. The AHLA described the tournament as a, quote, non-event and said the anticipated economic lift may fall short. Think about that. 80%. That's not a small concern from a handful of outliers. That's an industry-wide signal. And there was a second reason bookings were slow, one that had nothing to do with FIFA's contract decisions. The visa situation at this World Cup became one of the defining stories of the pre-tournament period, and it's still shaping the experience on the ground today. So subscribe this channel to get all latest updates on this story. Fans from countries subject to U.S. travel restrictions found themselves in an impossible position. They had purchased tickets, they had paid for hotels, in some cases they had booked flights months in advance, but when they applied for visas or checked their travel authorization, they were denied. Dozens of Moroccan supporters, members of official fan associations, had their visas rejected without explanation. Scottish fans reported having their electronic travel authorization revoked before the tournament. Iranian supporters faced an outright ban on traveling to U.S. venues for matches. The list of countries affected by U.S. travel restrictions, either outright bans or severe limitations, includes nationals from over 39 countries. While the U.S. government created carve-outs allowing players, coaches, and necessary support staff to enter, those exemptions did not extend to fans, not to journalists from certain countries, not to extended family members of players. The knock-on effect went beyond fans in the stands. A Somali referee, Omar Artan, had been selected to officiate matches at this World Cup. He was set to become the first Somali official ever to take charge of a World Cup game, an historic milestone. He was denied entry at Miami Airport despite holding a valid visa and all required documentation. FIFA confirmed he would unable to officiate at the tournament. Iraq's star striker Ayman Hussein was held and questioned for 7 hours at Chicago O'Hare on arrival. The team's photographer was detained for over 10 hours and ultimately denied entry altogether. These weren't abstract policy debates, they were football people, World Cup people being turned away at the door. And for the hotels trying to fill rooms, those same policies were the clearest explanation for why international visitors weren't arriving in the numbers that had been forecast. A report published in April by the American Hotel and Lodging Association cited visa troubles and the geopolitical climate as the primary deterrents for overseas travelers. Hotels in Canadian and Mexican host cities were outpacing their American counterparts in booking rates. The narrative that had once been entirely about economic windfall had quietly shifted. If you're finding this breakdown useful, subscribe to the channel. We go deep on every major story coming out of the 2026 World Cup. Now, here's where things get genuinely interesting, because the story doesn't end there. The pre-tournament picture painted by the hotel industry was bleak in places, but football has a habit of rewriting the script at the last minute, and that's exactly what happened.
As match days arrived and the atmosphere of a World Cup began to take hold, late bookings surged. In New York specifically, the data flipped almost completely. Hotel occupancy across the city climbed above 90% during key match days, the highest level of any host city during the tournament so far. Average daily room rates increased by 38% compared to the same period last year. One of the nights driving that surge was the France versus Senegal fixture at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey on June 16th, when 80,545 fans packed the stadium for a 3-1 French victory, and hotels across the metro area reported near full occupancy. The Manhattan View Hotel in Queens told reporters it had been sold out on many nights in June and July since bookings opened. The manager noted that advance reservations nearly a year out, something essentially unheard of in normal circumstances, had been a feature of their booking calendar. The pattern that emerged was one of late booking behavior on a massive scale. Fans weren't making plans months in advance the way organizers had hoped. They were waiting until fixtures were confirmed, until the atmosphere was established, until they could see what the tournament actually looked and felt like, and then booking at short notice. That matters because it completely distorts the pre-tournament forecasting models. The hotels and economists who were warning of a washout were working from early data that turned out to be a snapshot of a market that simply hadn't activated yet. But this is where the bigger picture gets complicated, because New York is not every host city. Zoom out from MetLife Stadium and the 90% occupancy figures, and you find a patchwork of performance across the 16 host cities. Some venues and markets surged, others are still waiting for the boom that was promised. And then there's the question of what's actually happening inside the stadiums themselves. FIFA released remarkable attendance figures in the early days of the group stage. After 6 days of play, over 1.3 million supporters had attended matches, with an average crowd of 65,483 per game. On June 16th alone, 281,223 fans attended 4 matches in a single day, a new all-time single-day attendance record, breaking a mark that had stood since the 1994 World Cup, also held in the United States. As of June 25th, with the Ecuador versus Germany match at MetLife Stadium completing the group stage, the 2026 World Cup officially set a new all-time cumulative attendance record, passing 3.6 million spectators across 56 games. The previous record of 3.587 million had been set in 1994, and the tournament still has the entire knockout phase ahead of it. The stadium occupancy rate stands at 99.7%. On paper, those numbers are extraordinary. But there's another layer to this, and it's a question that football fans watching at home have been asking from the very first week. If the stadiums are nearly full, why do some of them look half empty on television? This is a tension that surfaced early and hasn't gone away. Television broadcasts and social media clips from some opening week fixtures clearly showed noticeable pockets of empty seats. Canada's group stage opener against Bosnia and Herzegovina featured noticeable gaps in the stands. Qatar's 1-1 draw with Switzerland in Santa Clara, California, was announced at 67,966, just below the venue's capacity, yet the visual picture told a different story. In Guadalajara, South Korea's win over Czechia drew an official figure of 44,985 at a stadium listed at 45,664 capacity, but TV coverage showed numerous vacant sections. FIFA responded publicly. The organization issued a statement saying that official attendance figures reflect the number of tickets scanned and spectators present within the stadium footprint, rather than visual assessments of seating occupancy at any given moment. They also noted that in Guadalajara specifically, several ticketed fans were standing in concourses rather than remaining in their seats throughout the match. The explanation is technically plausible, but critics argue it doesn't fully account for the scale of what fans were seeing. And it's not a new conversation in football. Similar questions emerged at Brazil 2014 and Qatar 2022. FIFA's attendance methodology has always been a point of debate, and the 2026 edition hasn't resolved that debate. What seems clear is that the gap between tickets sold, tickets scanned, and bodies actually visible in seats can be significant. High ticket prices, which were widely criticized in the build-up to this tournament, may have contributed to no-show rates. When a ticket costs several $100s and circumstances change, the calculation of whether to attend versus whether to sell or simply not go becomes a very real one. Subscribe to the channel if you want us to keep tracking these numbers as the knockout rounds begin. The attendance story is going to get even more interesting when the stakes are higher.
Now let's talk about the broader economic picture, because this is ultimately the test against which this tournament will be judged by the countries that signed up to host it. FIFA's own projections put the total economic contribution of the World Cup at somewhere between $30 and $45 billion globally, with the United States expected to capture around $19 billion of that through tourism, hospitality, transport, and retail. Bank of America analysts published a forecast suggesting the tournament could contribute approximately $45 billion to global GDP. Those are enormous numbers, the kind of numbers that justify the infrastructure investment, the stadium upgrades, the security spending, and all the diplomatic complexity that hosting a World Cup entails. But independent economists are more cautious. An Oxford economics report predicted some GDP growth as a result of the games over the summer, but only temporary job gains in leisure and hospitality sectors. The gains, the report suggested, won't be evenly spread. Cities like New York, with its massive hotel infrastructure and global profile, are likely to capture a disproportionate share of any windfall. Smaller host cities, particularly those that relied heavily on FIFA's original room block commitments and saw those canceled, face a more uncertain return. One hotel executive in Chicago, a city that isn't even a host city for matches, told reporters he had expected a 4% revenue uplift from the World Cup. He's now forecasting half of that. And across all of this, there's a structural reality that analysts keep returning to. The United States was already experiencing a decline in foreign tourism before the World Cup began. Last year saw the largest drop in international visitors since the 2008 financial crisis, a 5.5% decline, totaling $8 billion in lost revenue. That context matters when evaluating whether a tournament alone can reverse a broader trend. For the fans who did make it, and there are millions of them, the experience inside the stadiums has been largely electric. The atmosphere at MetLife Stadium during the high-profile fixtures has drawn widespread praise. Mexico's opening night at the Estadio Azteca, with 80,824 fans watching the host nation beat South Africa, set the tone for what this tournament can feel like at its best. The sheer scale of 48 teams means there are fan communities here from nations that have never been at a World Cup before, or hadn't been for generations.
That diversity of support, when it actually makes it through the border and into the stands, creates a tournament atmosphere unlike anything that came before it. But the absence of fans who couldn't get visas is felt too. One analyst put it simply, it's one thing to have 100 people in one corner of a stadium cheering for your team. It's another thing entirely to have 5,000. That difference in noise, color, and energy matters on the pitch. Players feel it, broadcasters capture it, and viewers at home notice it. The supporters who saved for years, bought tickets months in advance, and then received a visa denial letter will watch these matches on television. They'll see the country they were supposed to be standing in, and they'll wonder what the World Cup could have been if the door had been opened a little wider. So where does all of this leave us as we head into the knockout stage? The 2026 World Cup is, by its own headline numbers, a historic success. Record attendance, record single-day crowds, 90% hotel occupancy in New York on key match days. A tournament that has delivered moments of genuine footballing brilliance in front of huge crowds. But it's also a tournament operating under the weight of contradictions. Hotel industries in some cities reporting below forecast bookings, fans denied access due to visa restrictions that were never resolved. A Somali referee who should have been making history turned away at the door. Empty-looking sections and stands where the official numbers say there should be a full house. The best-case scenario from here is that the knockout rounds deliver exactly what they always do: compression, drama, and last-minute emotion that overwhelms every other conversation. That the round of 32, the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and ultimately the final at MetLife Stadium on July 19th generates the kind of images and moments that write the legacy of this tournament rather than the spreadsheets and visa offices. The worst-case scenario is that the economic returns continue to fall short of what was promised. The questions about attendance figures persist, and the fans who were excluded from this tournament become the story that follows it into the history books. FIFA will, as it always does, declare the tournament a triumph. The numbers will be cited, the records will be confirmed, and football will move on to the next one. But somewhere, a Somali referee who spent his career working toward this moment is watching from home. And somewhere, fans from Morocco, from Scotland, from Iran, who bought tickets and booked hotels and made plans, are watching from their living rooms too. That's the story the official attendance record doesn't tell. If you've made it this far and you're not subscribed, now's the time. Hit the button and join us for every World Cup story that matters.